Hi, I'm Clever Ghoul, but you can call me Nikki. Welcome back to the channel. This week we're making some Gothic stained glass window earrings. Now, I'm not sure where inspiration struck, but if I had to guess, it would be because I just reread my favorite classic, Bram Stoker's Dracula, which of course then led me down the rabbit hole of rewatching all my favorite vampire media. And you know, there's always a dank, moldy, Gothic cathedral moment happening in vampire stories. So that's probably where the inspiration struck, and you know what? That makes total sense for me. Now, these are specifically more based on the 14th century style of Gothic windows, which you can look up. There's a lot of history. I want to be clear that while this architecture style has its roots in religion, this is really just for aesthetic purposes, and that's it. Now, there's two things I want to talk about before we get started: sizing and color. If you've never used shrink ink plastic before, the whole point of it is you draw out something and then you put it in the oven and it bakes and it shrinks down. The brand says that the design will cook down and shrink to 1/3 of the original design that you make. Therefore, if you're gonna make something that's 3 inches big when you draw it out, it's gonna end up baking down to 1 inch. So really think about that when you're figuring out the sizing that you want. That being said, I think it's good to do a test. So if I were you, I would make maybe 3 squares and make them in various sizes, kind of relating to the design you want. Then I would write in the middle what the size is. You make a 3-inch square, I would write 3 inches in the middle. Maybe you make a 2-inch square, write 2 inches in the middle. And then I would bake those and see if they actually shrink the way you want them to and if that sizing looks right to you. Now, the other thing I wanted to bring up was color. I use Sharpies to color my shrink inks. I would take whatever colors you're using for your color palette, pull out a piece of shrink plastic, do a little test of all the colors, cut it out and bake it real quick to see how they cook down. Because the color will change when baked, and I think it's a really good idea to test it beforehand so that you don't spend all this time making something and then it turns out completely different than how you envisioned. To start, I looked up a bunch of reference imagery to figure out how I wanted this window to look, and then I drew out how I wanted my window to look on my iPad. Next, I taped out the printed out design, taped down a piece of shrink plastic on top of that, and then using my extra fine tip and regular tip black Sharpies and a ruler, went around and started tracing the sketch onto the plastic. Then I did that again and again and again. It's really important to make a bunch of these because as you bake them, if some of them end up messed up, you don't want to have to go back and restart every single time. So I would say make a handful of them to start with so that if you lose some, it's not a big deal. When starting to add in color to these windows, I flipped the shrink plastic over so that the side I just made the black lines on was facing down, and then added the color to the back. I did this because sometimes the black lines will bleed into the color Sharpies and you don't want to make a big muddy mess. I wanted the frame of the window to be gray, but in my tests, the gray either came out too light or it came out a little too blue toned and it almost looked like it was trying to be stained glass. So I decided to scrap that idea and instead opted to use pointillism in the areas where I wanted to show where the window frame was. Pointillism is a great way to add shading, but it is tedious and time consuming. I love how it turned out, but it'll probably really annoy you, so don't do that if you don't have to. Next, I started to fill in the colorful stained glass portion of the windows using a pink and purple color palette. These colors were the ones I liked the best when I did a color test in the beginning of this project, and that's why I chose them. Once I put all the color down, it was time to cut these out, being careful to round out any edges as I cut so that when these bake down, there's not a sharp piece digging into the side of my neck. It's a really important thing to remember. Once they were all cut out, I carefully hole punched at the top, and then they were ready to bake. I baked these at 325 degrees Fahrenheit for about 4-ish minutes. I use a particular method when I do this. I take a piece of parchment paper and I fold it in half so it's like a book. Then I open it back up, take the shrinky dink and put the longest edge inside of that seam I just made, and then close up parchment paper again and then put it into bake. This way, the weight of that top parchment paper kind of helps keep the top of your shrinky dink more stabilized. And as it starts to shrink down, it wants to kind of curl up, but that weight kind of helps keep it flat. After the 4 minutes, you want to pull it out and now with an oven mitt, press it down onto a flat surface so that I don't burn myself, but that the piece stays as flat as possible. Once everything was done baking, it was time to seal the shrinky dinks. I used a special sealer from Mod Podge called Dimensional Magic. I really love it for shrinky dinks. I think it adds a nice, smooth, almost resin-like top on it without having to deal with mixing and curing resin, which can be kind of annoying. When you use this, be careful you don't want to shake it because it'll create bubbles. I pour it onto the shrinky dink and then using that nozzle, I just lightly spread it over the shrinky dink, covering the whole surface in a nice, smooth, even layer. I also take a toothpick and put it through the hole that we cut out and just make sure that there's no glue sitting in there when I put them down to dry. That way there's still an opening to add the jump ring in when we're making the earring. The Dimensional Magic takes about 3 hours to dry, so I let that sit for that time. Then I come back, flip it over, and do the same process on the back side before moving on to adding in the jump rings and the earring findings. Once everything was all dry, I pulled out some jump rings and some pliers and the earring findings and got to adding those on. Basically basically I would just open a jump ring with the pliers, put one end through the shrinky dink, and then add the earring finding to the other side, take those pliers and close the jump ring back up, and that was it, which means it's time for the reveal. Ta-da, here they are. I really actually like how they turned out. They're fun and interesting, and I really like the shape, but I really love how when light comes through, you get that stained glass sort of effect, and you still get the archway and interesting, intricate details of the Gothic window frame. I will say that this project did have some trial and error. Like I said, I did test in the beginning, which did seem like they took forever. In fact, I think the part that takes the longest is the tracing, because you're just tracing over and over and over again to make sure that you have your design right, but it is worth it in the end. Now, I think you could do this project with so many different styles of stained glass. You could do more of what we think of when we think of stained glass, like a Tiffany style, craftsman-y style, Art Nouveau style. If you were to make stained glass earrings, what kind of style would you make? Let me know in the comments. I would love to hear. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!